In May of 1979, Alan and Linda Redrup relocated from Florida, where Alan had been a pastor, to the Washington, D.C. area in order to learn from and be a part of Covenant Life Church, led by C.J. Mahaney and others. 4 years after their arrival there, the Lord made it clear to me, to C.J. and to the other pastors there, that I should lead a church planting team to the Philadelphia area. They felt that the church plant was more likely to succeed if I was teamed with someone with complementary gifts, someone whose relational and pastoral graces were stronger than mine, a couple whose relational and pastoral graces were greater than ours. Alan and Linda were known in the church to have those strengths, but it was a large church, and Alan and I were only acquaintances. So CJ sent us to a conference together in York, Pennsylvania, and traveling together, not 20 minutes up the road, we became lifelong friends. Alan joined the church planting team, and he brought along with him some of those who had been following him from Florida and some friends he made in Maryland, Tim and Cindy. Alan and Linda's relational warmth and their grace in extending hospitality to strangers proved crucial when this church launched in October of 1984.
Tim, I was wondering if you'd be able to share just some about how many people were on the original church planting team, and what were some of the sacrifices that you saw people on that team make in order to be a part of the church plant of Covenant Fellowship?
Let me start counting. 1, 2, there was 14 adults, and I think 11 kids that came with us. And as far as sacrifice, we, like even worshiping tonight and thinking about 25 years, it's hard to think about that it was a sacrifice. Only in looking back and thinking, okay, what was it like? But now, in light of what God has done, it was no sacrifice. But I think at the time, probably the biggest thing was relationships. I think leaving the church that we loved, leaving the people that we loved, the place where we had built our lives, all of our close friendships, all of our support systems were there at Covenant Life Church. So I think that was probably the biggest feeling of sacrifice, was going to, in a sense, a strange land, a brand new place, just the 14 of us and our kids there. So, and then I think on the other side of sacrifice were jobs. Apart from Bill, none of the rest of us knew what we were going to do.
And I wasn't sure I'd still have a job a year later.
Bill was scared. Bill was more scared than us. Alan had a house under contract and gave up a deposit, I think, and gave up his job. Everybody did something, but Alan's story was a little unique that way.
So come on up. Before we appreciate them as a team, I would just like to do one other thing. I'd like to remember what they initially did. This was a group of people who really prayed fervently that God would move in this area. And as you can see, we were much younger back then. At one point, Alan was leading 4 care groups. Some of you are care group leaders. You know the challenge of leading 1. Imagine leading 4. Alan did that, and his wife Linda. And the care that many of you have experienced down through the years that have come from this couple is worthy of honor. Bob and Val Wright. Bob, where are you, Bob? Bob risked his business. Bob had a flourishing business in the Washington, D.C. area, but he felt God was leading him to be a part of this church planting team. He relocated his business to the Philadelphia area with no client base here whatsoever, and really hung it out. Really trusting God. He risked his business. He was the first one to move here. He ended up here early in the summer of 1984, so that whenever the others of us would come up to look for homes or anything like that, we would stay at Bob and Val's house And I think just about every member of the team lived in their house for some number of weeks. I know we lived there for a little over a month. We called it 40 days and 40 nights. And Bob, of course, was so instrumental in helping us get set up. We shared the secretary that first year, and shared offices with Bob's business. So we owe them a great debt. Tim and Cindy Campbell, of course, have been involved with children's ministry from the very beginning and really helped lay foundations there. Fred Cato served as our first sound technician as a single man. He also was one of two or three singles that we had on the team, so he aggressively pursued other singles just to establish friendships and to get to know them. Fred worked tirelessly, set up, tear down, doing the sound. Everybody had to wear many, many hats back in those days. Martin Stanley. Martin was one of our first musicians. He's a good piano player, so we were able to start off with good music. Martin did that. Martin also was our first graphics artist, and he's continuing to do that now for People of Destiny, but you'll notice the deer logo, which is over there. Martin designed that 10 years ago and said, why don't we do a deer and something about as the deer pants for the water, and we thought that was a great idea. So, brother, thank you very much for doing that. Cindy Story was our first secretary. She came up specifically to serve us in that capacity, and Cindy just spent hours and hours and hours in front of a computer before anybody knew how to work a computer. And she really helped us get started there. Lynn Guerrero was also on the team. She's married. She lives in Florida with her husband and children and is not here today. Chuck and Sharon were the first children's ministry coordinators. And where are you guys? There they are. And so they really started the children's ministry here at Covenant Fellowship, which was a tremendous sacrifice because we were having, after a while, we had some numbers of people and very few children's workers. So they really did a terrific job. So that's what they all did, and we have a plaque, or I guess a certificate, which they've received. Can we express our gratitude to these people for their sacrifice right now? Thank you very much.
Some especially here as we're celebrating the 25th. As you think back to those early years into the church plant, what are some of the memories that you have that you can share with those of us who weren't around back then?
Well, if I can jump in, I have too many to count. But somebody got the bright idea early on, I think it was my wife, to invite the church over for dinner after the meeting. And as much as I tried to figure out a reason why not to do that, I couldn't. So we said, well, let's do that. And you kind of never know what to expect, but we would actually every Sunday, we would invite everybody, and they came. They really did. It was. I counted one time. It was just ridiculous. So I counted 105 adults plus children. The house took the hits. But we had wonderful, wonderful fellowship. People would stay. Linda and I would go upstairs and go to bed. People still downstairs. And we just said, that's it, we're out of here, you know. But it was just God's grace in bringing wonderful people to this church.
In the Bible, we are joined not only to God, but to one another. And so there's implications of the new covenant. In fact, that's why we call ourselves Covenant Fellowship. What we had in mind was not covenant theology. It was this idea that the gospel joins us to Christ and joins us to one another. And God has a purpose for our generation that we want to throw ourselves into. We want to throw ourselves into his broader purpose. And you folks just got it. I can't tell you how many people would come up to me and say, Bill, we're here. What do you want us to do? We're ready to work. We want to serve the purpose of God in our generation. We want to do something for Christ before we get old and we can't do anything anymore, like we are now. That's why we got the kids coming on. But so many of you just understood that that the implication of the gospel is that God wants to glorify himself and spread the gospel through a people.
Yeah.
And you understood that, and you gave yourselves to it. 3 words were very prominent in our vocabulary back then: covenant, community, and commitment. Before the actual Sunday services began, we had a marriage conference, and C.J. Mahaney, Larry Tomzak would come up alternate weeks to speak, and that was on a weeknight. And then on the weeknight meeting, we'd invite people to come out Sunday morning. And I remember the first Sunday morning service back at my house, one of the few times we had hospitality at my house. Most of the time it was at the Redrips. But back at my house, there was one couple that had come to the midweek marriage meetings, and then they visited on Sunday, and they said, we love it here. This is our church. This is our church. And after for a year, we knew we were coming to the Philadelphia area. There had been lots of giving, lots of sacrificial giving from people at Covenant Life Church, a lot of money invested. People had uprooted their families, had left homes, had left jobs, had come here. Enormous sacrifices being made by people. You wonder, is there going to be any fruit? And the joy that I felt when that first family said, this is our church.